How's it going, folks? And thanks for joining me, and thanks for coming on, Jim.
Thanks so much, Cornell. Glad to be with you tonight.
Now, I found Jim through actually YouTube. That's where I found everybody these days because it's my favorite TV station ever invented. It's amazing. You know, from fixing cars to learning about near-death experiences to, you know, Napoleonic history. Um, Jim is Jim is first and foremost a. What would you say you were first and foremost? What are you best known for apart from
Oh
near death
gosh,
experience?
a lot of different things, but I lived in Africa off and on 14 years making wildlife films for European television and National Geographic. And then I um, was the first person to shrink a TV truck into a backpack because I saw Disney out scouting a location in the middle of nowhere in Africa with a satellite phone back in the early 90s. And I wondered, I wonder if you can push video over that. And I became the
Really?
first person in the world to do it. And so we were able to now backpack in the capability to transmit live video from pretty much anywhere in the world. And I did all 7 continents, the Titanic, Mount Everest, in both polar regions, and then eventually in a lot of war zones as a war correspondent for NBC News here in America.
Were you up Everest?
I went to base camp 5 times, 5 years in a row. I was supposed to go to the summit the first year. This was on behalf of the King of Malaysia, but in the end, I think they decided they just wanted to have Malaysians on that team, and that was fine. But what I did is I sent my transmitters I had to hand build up Mount Everest, and then they literally bounced the video signal around the highest mountains in the world until it got to base camp, where I uplinked it by my satellite system.
Now, did you patent this new technology with
I had a
satellite phone?
I had a provisional patent, but in the middle of all this, my excellent patent attorney, who was super healthy and ran marathons, just dropped dead. And the team he left the work to was the B team. So I never really patented it like I wish I had or could have, though it wasn't for lack of trying. But what happened was nobody could figure out. I know for 4 years there were people chasing me trying to figure out how I put this all together, and they never did.
So your second biggest claim to fame was an NBC war correspondent during the second Iraq War, right?
That is correct.
Now, how long were you over there for?
I was over there for pretty much all of 2003. I was embedded with the Marines, and then I did come home for a month, and then I went back for the rest of the year. And I oscillated between being embedded with the Army, the Marines, and then just being on deck at NBC to do hourly reports and things like that.
You got out while the going was good because the insurgency didn't really start till 2006, was it?
That's correct. Yeah. What's interesting is when I was there, and as soon as we ended the regime of Saddam Hussein, when we would be driving down the street, like sitting on top of our Humvees and all that, people were literally running into the street, cheering and waving flags. We drove by this one, literally like a liquor store. All these people broke into the liquor store and they ran after us carrying whiskey and all these other things, trying to give it to us as gifts. You truly felt like, oh my gosh, we really helped these people by liberating them. But like you say, after that, the insurgency started to grow, and that brought its own problems with it.
Now, did you find that when you were embedded, you were restricted in your reporting?
Nope.
They let you go wherever you wanted?
I could go wherever I wanted and say whatever I wanted, and there was tremendous amount of mutual respect. In fact, I came away with more, in this case, love for our Marines than I ever would have thought. I really loved being with these guys. They were great men. Yeah, well, here is an example. The first report I did for NBC News, well, the first real report was when we invaded Baghdad. A lot of people in Baghdad didn't know they were invaded. It was really strange. It was totally unsecured. But I've heard that there was this Missionaries of Charity, that was Mother Teresa's order, that there was a mission there that no one had heard from, and they were in Baghdad proper. No one had heard from them since all the bombing and the attack. So someone asked, do you think you could check on them? So I went to Marine Intelligence. They went to the CIA. They came back and said, it's here on this map, but again, totally unsecured. And the colonel I was with, said, well, here, take my guys, take my armor Humvee and go find them. So I did. So we found the mission. I went up and, took all my body armor off and everything, and I banged on the door and I said, "Hey, nobody's heard from you." And they were from like Bangladesh and India. They just looked at me. They were like so chill, and they just looked at me like, "What's the problem?" So they invited me inside, and then I found out, not necessarily, well, at first I found out why nobody heard from them, but I found out why they were still there and why they didn't run like hell once all the bombs started going off. There was a room in which they had about 20 something cribs with babies with serious mental and physical handicaps. This was what happened to children who were born with flippers instead of hands, or no legs, or they, like I said, there was just, mental challenges you can't even begin to name. People would literally leave them on the door, leave them on the step, knock on the door, and run away. And now these nuns would take them in. So they said, how would we have gotten out of here and taken all these children? So they didn't leave. They stayed there with the children throughout all the, scary bombing. And when I saw that, I said, "Can I do a story on you for NBC News?" And of course,
I saw that.
Yeah, and of course, them being very humble, they said, "Oh no, we're not trying to toot our own horns." I said, "This isn't about you. This is about what you stand for. This is about giving everybody a reason to not run." And they said, "Okay." So I did the story on them, and the Marines came in. They were fighting to hold those babies. They lit big guys, body armor, holding babies. This was like them really, war just sometimes changes you a little bit. And this was a chance to kind of nourish that human part of, like being a man, being a protector. And it was really awesome, cool to see it. And I went back several more times, and the Marines were always fighting to come with me. And these nuns got to see that. And then I got to set up a satellite telephone. I said, "Call whoever's important to you and tell them you're okay." And that story ran on Good Friday, and it ran 10 times over the Easter weekend. And that was pretty much my first story I ever really did for NBC News. And it was great. And we just continued to have a good time after that, getting the news out, telling people what was going on, pulling no punches, but not blowing any smoke either, just being real.
And then you come home, and we got some comments here I'm not going to address. So walk me up to you always had an interest in engineering and plane building and stuff. And or am I missing a whole section of stuff leading up to this?
That's a great way to segue. So what happened was, somewhere in all this, now think about it. I mean, I had this job where I was going all over the world, and it had great bragging collateral at a party or a bar or something like that. But what was missing was actually having a family, having people who actually really cared. And so somewhere in all this, I met a widow with 3 babies. And for some reason, it seemed like that was a good idea to join the circus, as I call it. And so we did get married. I decided to take on these 3 kids, and I'll say to this day, it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, it's admirable.
And somewhere in this, my new wife said, now that you sort of transferred over to like corporate life, I was running the business programming unit at Pfizer because of all the media technology. And she said, now that you're trying to be this corporate animal, you're going to need something for excitement, because you're used to living a kind of high adrenaline, high testosterone life. She said, "Why don't you build one of those really old airplanes you always talked about?" Well, I was a pilot, and I'm a pilot, and I'd always had a love of like World War I aircraft and even aircraft before that. So I did that, and it took me about 8 years. I built a reproduction World War I aircraft, just like the Red Baron flew, a Fokker triplane, had 3 wings, but I had my own unique black and white design. And I flew it, and it was great. And I sold it to an Air Force pilot. And then I built a second aircraft, which was more whimsical in design, like something out of a Disney movie, to be honest. It was kind of like cute. And on its second test flight, that's when I lost my engine. And where I was flying here in Connecticut in the countryside, it was very hilly, very rocky, and very forested. So there wasn't, much in the way of a choice of where I'd put it down. But there was a nearby Boy Scout camp that had a small lake. And I said, well, I'll just aim for that. It's open cockpit. I'll come in as slow as I can and just, pop the seatbelt once I hit. And didn't quite go according to plan. I overshot the bank and crashed into all these tree trunks at about 70 miles an hour. in a plane about the size of a soapbox derby car with a big propeller and motorcycle engine right in front of my face. I don't know how I didn't eat that, but that when I stopped crashing, probably 15 feet later, there was no aircraft really left around me. It was all turned to matchsticks, except what was behind me that I was still seat belted to.
And you had no protection in front of your face, so those propellers could have hit you
Oh,
right in the kisser.
yeah, absolutely. Everything could have gone to hell really fast.
And then what happened?
Well, by grace of God, because this was in October, so it was actually October 6th, so it was just over 6 years ago. It was in 2016. There was a retired policeman who was fishing in this Boy Scout camp. Why? Because at that time of year it was closed and it was nice and it was peaceful and he was solitary until I came in and broke that up. So he saw the entire crash and he ran over. His name is Greg Gubatosi, and he ran over and he kept me propped up because turned out later I found out I ruptured both lungs, broke all my ribs. My right leg looked like a pretzel, had a hole in my lower back from the battery breaking loose and hitting me at 70 miles an hour. My chin was all torn up and hanging down. And he was able to keep me propped up while he called 911 and got a medical evacuation helicopter to come in and get me. And so they did. About let's just say 45 minutes later, they landed and got me out of what was left of the aircraft, put me on the helicopter and flew me up to Hartford, Connecticut's trauma center, where a waiting team was there, and they took me right in. And maybe 3 hours later, when people figured stuff out, my family and friends started showing up at the hospital, and by then they had me in a breathing machine. They had me intubated with a big tube down my throat. They also had other tubes coming in and going out of me. And I had already escaped from the restraints once. They had to re-restrain me. And their recommendation was, we have multiple day-long operations for the next week going on. And we could lose him at any time. Some of these operations only have like a 2% chance of success. So we recommend putting him into a medically induced coma. And that way, he's not a pain in the ass to everybody. He can heal, he can rest, and we can focus. So they said, yeah, let's do that. So, without really being able to say, okay, so I looked at the stopwatch and clicked it. My general way of telling it, and it's not really important, I think, where it's exactly right or wrong, is that when my near-death experience started here, when the medically induced coma started here, my near-death experience started.
Okay. So let's start with that.
Yeah, that brings you up to the good stuff. The how a lot of near-death experiences people will talk about, maybe they first came out of their body and they could look down and see their body and the doctors, and then maybe they go through a tunnel. That's a big one, tunnel.
The tunnel, yeah.
Yeah, we hear that a lot. And then maybe as soon as they get through the tunnel, they may see deceased loved ones, like a favorite grandparent or maybe even a parent or maybe even a child or a dog, who knows? But they see something to kind of talk them off the ledge, stop hyperventilating. And then a lot of times, certainly not all, there are exceptions here and there, but a lot of times it might be a very beautiful scene they're in, like a beautiful field or just something about it that makes it really beautiful and calming. And then they may even see angelic beings or something like that. But at some point, many have a life review. It's kind of like, Scrooge in the Christmas Carol. They see how they've lived their life up to this point. It's not meant to just sit there and make them feel bad about all the people they, weren't nice to, or how they, haven't lived their life perfectly. It's really just to kind of take stock of, again, where they're at. And a lot of people do experience the feelings of hurt from the people they hurt or things like that, because, there are 20 million reasons that might happen or be necessary. But at some point, they're given this big message. It might be, go back and live your life in service to others or something like that. It's generally a good message. No one's come back, in contrast to being a hallucination, no one's come back saying God told me to be a serial killer. Generally, it's all positive messaging, like be happy. That's a good place to start as well. Don't beat yourself up, and maybe be more patient with those that, aren't getting this message. So my experience, by contrast, I had no tunnel. I just instantly teleported or appeared in post-apocalyptic landscape. And I described that as, imagine, like a big city, like whether it's New York or Boston or LA or something like that, 1,000 years after a nuclear blast or something like that, just totally dead landscape in ruins. And I was standing up maybe on what would have been like a terrace of a tall building, just looking out across this dead landscape. And above me were these huge dark clouds. In fact, there's a picture over my shoulder that depicts exactly what I saw.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring that up on the screen, but that's right there. Yeah.
Yeah. The mother of all storms looked like it was ready to just cut loose. And in that picture, those clouds are from an actual photograph over New York City back in, I think it's 2018 or 2019, when a bunch of tornadoes were hitting New Jersey. Those were actual clouds. I mean, they're so ominous looking. So I said, I want to use those. And then, and as I looked around, all of a sudden I got hit by this wave of nausea and I just doubled over in pain. And I said, I don't think I can stand this. And when I did, I heard this sound off to my left, and that's what that egg-shaped sculpture is. That was the only thing of any real interest there that I could see. It was, again, a large egg-shaped sculpture about 4 or 5 stories high, made out of open lattice work. And I could see through the lattice to the interior, and I could see these slight movements. And so I made my way over to it and looked inside through the gaps. And I could see these tiny gears freely suspended in the air, and they were just kind of idling. And they were a special kind of gear that I really didn't know anything about, called a sector gear. Yeah, there you go. And that's it. You're showing everything right there. So there's the view of where I was. And that particular gear is called a sector gear. You might find them in like a motorcycle transmission. You might find them in certain kinds of clocks. The idea is that a normal gear, if you will, is round with all those little teeth, and it just spins around and around. A sector gear is designed to sweep back and forth, its movement having a beginning, middle, and end. And that was significant in representing what they meant. As I looked at these gears, they were just kind of, you might say chaotic, seemingly chaotically arranged, and just slowly moving. Some were very clear and definite, and some were more ghost-like or ephemeral, and they would just pass through each other in a physically impossible manner. But when I looked at them, whether they were, like I said, clear and definite or kind of ghostly, when I looked at them, I could see a video feed play in my head, and that was telling me this is what that gear represents. It represents a moment in my life. And then as I looked at myself, I saw, well, I'm older, or, oh, here are my kids. Oh, now they have kids, so I'm a granddad. Things like that have not come yet. So I realized after a time I was looking at all these events that were in my future. They weren't in my past. They were in my future. So in a strange way, this was kind of like a life review, but it was mostly based on my future, the future being the fruit of all your past decisions, all your past choices. So, but with something you could actually still maybe prevent. So, like I said, I looked around, and, at some point I reached through the lattice to see if I could touch these gears. I mean, certainly I felt, well, I can touch this one. I wonder if this one has any feeling. And a gear brushed by my hand, and another wave of nausea went with me. And with a reflex, I pulled it out and threw it away. And then all the gears started spinning around like angry hornets until they settled down again. And that's when I literally just said out loud, like, what is this thing? And this disembodied voice literally came and stayed with me throughout the whole experience and said, this is the future birthing into the now. This is the process of becoming. And I said, well, what's happening with these gears? Are we spinning into a new configuration? And it said, each gear is the probability of a thought, word, or action in your future. Your destiny is setting itself, resetting itself around what you've removed. And I said, well, how did I know that I could do that? Like remove that gear. And it literally asked me, why else are you here? I said, I don't even have an idea what this place is. And it said, you're in the in-between. And I said, in between what? And it said, everything. The impossible now between the past and the future. And it said, it's impossible in that short duration, yet here you are standing inside the eternity of a single moment. And then it said, do you remember the world to which your body belongs? And I promise you, I sat there and thought, I have no clue. In fact, if you'd said, if you stay here any longer, you can't go back, I'd say, go back where? Well, to your family. What family? I was depersonalized down to zero. I have no fear, no thought, no anticipation, there was no emotion, no real thought. It was just very present and in that moment. And it said to me, well, then you see the truth and how the past is dust. And then everything started to make sense with this next question. I said, why do some of these gears, these futures that I touch, make me sick and not others? And it said, all choices have unintended consequences, some unfortunate, some not. The pain each brings is your guide. And I said, well, where are the gears that feel good? And I said, you're not here to feel good. Wasn't threatening. It was just saying, you're here to do work, kind of like boot camp, right? And so, a new gear swung into view. And in this one, I saw what would be a happy memory one day of future grandchildren at an amusement park. And I was there. And, obviously I let that gear stay. I wasn't pulling that one out. But, the gears just kind of kept sort of coming into view and then moving out of view. And each time they came to rest, I would use pain as my great moral compass to search around and find one that hurt, and then I'd remove it. So the idea here is that you can make choices about what possible probabilities you want to keep in your future that you could choose based on how much pain they may cause you or they might cause others. And if they hurt, you might be more inclined to never want to make that choice, to never have the temptation to make that choice. Let's just pull it, remove it, and it's gone. So it's like I was given the opportunity to stack the deck. Not that I probably removed every possible bad decision in my future, but hopefully I have a lot more good ones left over bad ones. So, the chance of going down the wrong road isn't so much there. And, I said, at some point I was pulling out so many gears, I turned around and saw this huge pile of gears. Remember, in our time, I think I was there for a week. There, it's probably the blink of an eye. But I saw this huge pile of gears building up behind me. And I said, geez, it looks like if I don't have a bad future, I have no future at all. Am I going to die sooner from doing all this? And it said, your destiny has to fit itself around futures that aren't meant to be. Your number of breaths are already counted. I will worry about your last one. And I said, well, I don't know how comforting that is. And it said, well, eliminating bad choices doesn't mean you won't make wrong ones. You can make a mistake and it's not necessarily a sin. It said, but you won't know they're wrong until after they pass. And because right and wrong are variables over which you really don't have any control, the answers to what come tomorrow are a waste. It's just better to understand how things fit together and the beauty of how they fit and refit together. And that was it, telling me pretty much, have faith in the grand design. And like I've said before, when people talk about the need to pray, if you have to pray to the creator of the universe that you have to make next month's rent, that's not a prayer. That's a crisis of faith. How about you just leave them alone, and stay out of the way. Just do what you know you need to do to make the right choices so you're not in that position as best you can. Anyway, at some point I said, I just knew that this thing was so much bigger than me. I said, what am I missing here? And it said, what is clearly before you? Grace. It said, no one deserves salvation. It can only be given by grace. Yet it's your birthright, but it must be chosen at the expense of the world that separates us. You can't row in two boats at once, right? And so I said, this fixing my future is painful work. I said, and I also feel ashamed that I don't have a better moral compass than pain. It's not like I have a mantra or a guru or something like that. I said, I'm only guided by pain. I said, I don't know when or where these futures happen. And I said, where or when just aren't important. But removing your enthusiasm to chain yourself to the world isn't as painful later as carrying the crushing weight of those chains once forged around you. And then I said, it's like, I feel like a mouse in a maze. I said, it's like, there's only one thing I can do here with very little chance to screw it up. And that's when it said to me, probably the most profound thing anyone's ever said. It said, if those with choices make poor use of them, then offering fewer possibilities could be called mercy. I said, you can't change the past, but you can make better choices in the future. Everything is interconnected, and pay more attention to your relationships. Be gentle with everyone as I'm gentle with you. And I said, gentle, thinking about all this pain. I said, what's gentle about all this? And then it said, you prayed for something for which being here is the answer. And now the man who fell from the sky is not the same who flew into it. And with that, I took one last look out across that dead city and then the egg, and I put my hand on it and said, I think I can live with this now. And that's when it pretty much booted me out.
So during this whole time, could you actually see your body and stuff, or was this just all in your consciousness?
See, it's interesting you say that. The only time I'd say I was aware of my body was when I first materialized there, if you will. I materialized It's like my right knee was on the, remember I was up on this terrace. So let's say it this way. My right knee was on the ground and my left foot was next to it. So it was like I was in a semi-kneeling, almost getting ready to stand position. And I can remember like seeing my legs, if you will, but it's not like I saw my hands or could tell you, oh yeah, there's hair on my arms or anything like that. I just remember I did see my legs, if you will, when I materialized there.
Now, why do you think that your NDE is a lot different from other people? Because most people have that whole, going into the tunnel and meeting someone that gives them a choice.
Sure. Here's how I would characterize it. And if you think about it, tell me if you agree. Going through a tunnel, talking to dead loved ones, having a life review, being told some big message, versus having to dynamically and actively interact with the experience in order to make changes in your future. One is, to me, a very passive experience. And the other was a very proactive, a very interactive experience. And to me, that makes it very different because I don't hear a lot of near-death experiences. And I'm not trying to say I'm special. I'm just saying, I'm sitting here, noodling this, trying to understand it at all. And at some point, when I hear about near-death experiences, of course, I'm going to look for validation in terms of what's the same, but you can't deny what also appears to be very different.
Now, do you think that this seems like kind of the gears and stuff and the lattice, it seems like it was more of a technological experience? Do you think that's because you were technological minded, whereas someone who is more, like, say, a Christian would see like a Jesus figure, or someone was a Muslim would see like a Muslim experience?
Yeah, I'm sure let's put it, coming from where I was coming from, I was certainly the more limited consciousness there. And, you have to deliver the message to the audience in the ways they can understand, right? So, yeah, the fact that it was kind of like it was a machine, right? And I was building airplanes. So, it made perfect sense, right? I don't build computers, or maybe it would look like a big computer. But I've also said, it could be like someone walking into a beautiful garden that had weeds that had to be removed, with those weeds representing unpleasant choices in the future. So I have no problem at all saying that this message could have taken many different forms. And I think one way to boil it down is that here in this world, we tend to see life through the filters we want, right? We wake up in the morning, we look in the mirror and say, there's the best looking guy, there's the best looking woman, there's the most competent, whatever. And we go out the door telling ourselves those things. But on the other side, we tend to see life through the filters we need, not what we want. And we accept it, light and all, warts and all.
Now, when you come out of this coma, this coma lasted for a week. How long did
well, the coma definitely lasted a week. Whether the NDE lasted for a week or not, who can really say? I don't know. But I generally reference it because I'll tell you, toward the end, watching those gears spin around and around again, every time I removed one, I will say this, it started to almost feel like torture. It was like very uncomfortable. Just, oh God, they're spinning around again. I'm really getting tired of seeing this. And that's why I said at some point, I think I can live with this now. I really was ready to go.
Right. So you're ready to go back, and then you go back, but you're still in a coma for another while.
Well, that's
you don't know.
Well, yeah, here's the thing. I would say this. When I came out of the coma, it was still another week before I really had a functioning mind. And the reason I know that is because of once I came out of the coma, how long they kept me in the hospital before they transferred me to a rehabilitation hospital. And I would say my first memory was definitely in the rehabilitation hospital. And my first memory was the just cycling over and over of this NDE. And I remember like, what is this? What happened? And what's interesting is that later on, I asked for my laptop because I wanted to start writing this down before any of it could have faded. And so one of the first things I did was I went back into my emails and I said, what's the last email I remember either reading or sending? It was 2 days before my crash. I had 2 days of good, normal person before crash memories knocked out of me. So it's interesting. I had this incredibly lucid, super conscious experience that I could, remember perfectly clearly between two bookends of amnesia. Isn't that interesting?
Hmm. Now, so you obviously you weren't waking up and telling the doctors right away what had happened. This was a long, slow
No, no.
process.
Yeah, what
Nobody ever does
happened?
that.
Right, right. Like, hey, doc. What happened was, like I said, as I lay there in the hospital, just kind of coming to, if you will, and this event was just going over and over and over in my mind. It really, with each iteration, each going through it again, there was just more depth, more detail, more of an emotional impact. And finally, like everybody in a hospital, you have three shifts of nurses, if you will, right? And the morning shift was totally the A team. I mean, like military efficiency, but really sharp, really knowledgeable. I felt very well cared for. And this one young woman named Jen, I know sometimes it just seemed like she was hanging out in there because we would talk about stuff, and who knows, maybe she just needed as much an escape from her day-to-day life as I needed somebody to talk to. And so I asked her, I said one day, I said, do you mind if I just share with you this stuff that's going on in my head right now? And she said, no, no, it's fine. And she leaned against the wall. Her body language said, yes, she was really interested. So I told her about my NDE. And sometime during this, she started crying. I said, why are you crying? She said, I don't want you to die, because I'm talking about a near-death experience. And I said, well, you're a nurse in a hospital. You see death all the time. She said, yeah, but you're magical. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? She said, well, for example, how busy everybody in a hospital is. It's, it's on TV. Everybody's always complaining about it. Said, usually patients here get like 15 minutes of their doctor's time per day. Said, but you seem to have 3 to 5 doctors in here for an hour and a half. And I walk by wondering what the hell you're talking about. And you're talking about everything but your medical case. One doctor is so much wanting you to be in business with him. He has you on international phone calls at night with your leg in a cage up in the air, doped up on, like Percocet or something. She said, I've never seen anything like it. And I think that for me was the first clue about where this statement takes effect. And that's PMH Atwater, who's a great researcher with NDEs, like 20 books. Her first NDE was back in 77. She's really like the godmother to me of NDEs. Very down to earth, very real person. She said, if you're not psychic before, you will be after. And if you were psychic, you'll be more so after. I'm not claiming to be psychic, but I would say that one thing that seemed to have the volume knob turned up was a sense of empathy with people. And in such a way that I think just allowed them to feel a really nice connection with you. And I think where some of this also was taking focus was, I have this like really great, forgive me, like a Match.com shot of me smoking cigars with the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan while I was gun running for the Joint Special Operations Command, because NBC News didn't know I was also working for the military.
That's in the thumbnail.
Yeah. And so my wife at the time, who obviously loved that picture, she taped it to the wall, I guess trying to encourage me, like, this is the guy I want you to heal back to. So that was her cheerleading my recovery. Well, of course, people would come in and see the picture and they'd want to hear the backstory, right?
Right.
And every time they would ask about this person, I thought, I'm not that person anymore. That person died in the plane crash. I'm somebody else now. And that's when I started realizing just how much, and this was verified through, further research in the International Association of Near-Death Studies website, which was my first real go-to that came months later, for understanding that I'd had a near-death experience and what it was like, and then what comes after. And so you could say that the integration phase, this coping phase, started immediately when I woke up. And it's just where you're constantly chewing on stuff, and you're asking yourself, is what was true yesterday true today? Because you feel so different. You feel different about everything. A lot of times things don't bother you as much. It's harder to get stressed out, if you will. And then, of course, this leads to problems with relationships. People quit jobs, they quit marriages, they change all their friends because they just don't resonate the same as they did before. And you start finding yourself looking for, I guess, a new sense of family or a new sense of friends. And so if you're fortunate enough to find a group of other near-death experiencers, it's amazing. If you were to stand up before them, total stranger, and say, this was my near-death experience, and right now, here are the challenges I'm having in living life. everyone in that room could probably finish your sentence for you. And then you really start to feel like, okay, this is some relief. And then you could become part of a different community.
I'm thinking these doctors, I mean, they probably don't talk about it, but they must hear stuff like this from time to time.
Yeah,
A
a lot
lot.
do. And a lot of them are becoming more aware of it. Even if they don't say, oh, I believe in it, they still understand you do. And, for whatever reason you do, all they need to do is just be supportive while you're working it out. But yeah, nurses and doctors, it's amazing what they sometimes hear and sometimes describe. And of course, they, for their own careers, because it's a very
Right.
conservative environment, they have to be careful how they handle it. But however, you have Dr. Eben Alexander, who's a
Yeah.
Harvard neurosurgeon.
Neurosurgeon. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he had the guts to stand up and talk about it, and he still does. So hopefully, examples like his will help other people come forward and share it. And one, to support that point, it's been estimated maybe 10% of the world has had a near-death experience.
Yeah. And if you guys haven't heard of Eben Alexander, look up him on his story is quite a story. Now, you believe that story?
Yeah, yeah, I
You
know,
find
I
him
know, I
authentic?
know Evan. Yeah, I know Evan. Yeah,
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 his
I
story is
totally
fun.
get it.
That's one of the first I really heard. I mean, I'd read Raymond Moody's book years ago that has a collection of NDEs, but
Sure.
I remember I actually bought Alexander's book, and it was just fantastic.
Oh yeah, no, he's a great speaker, and he's still carrying a lot of research now, and looking at it from different angles, and it's quite active. So, like I said, it's an opportunity to meet some really great people. And the first IANS, International Association of Near-Death Studies, the first international conference I ever went to, because I'm a loner, so this is more meaningful to me at least. I'm a
Yeah,
loner, I'm an introvert, but standing there in front of a big conference room ready to go in, right? The doors open and everybody who's in there is leaving, so you can go in. And it's amazing how all these strangers, when they look at you in the eye, there's this hint of recognition. And then throughout the lobby of this hotel and convention center, all the little chairs tucked into corners start filling up, and people who have never met before sit down and just start talking about some very intimate details about their life, and again, how they're coping with integration. And it's almost like, if an alien race was here and they were comparing notes on what life on planet Earth were like. And it was just really amazing to see that. I've never seen that before at any other conference I've been to, but certainly at that. And like I said, through my near death experience, I've met some really wonderful people. And at the end of the day, I guess as painful as it was, and all the changes that came in my life that followed, I'm very grateful for having had it.
now, how did your life change, as in just normal everyday life, like driving around and like going to the coffee shop and work, and like how did you see all of that? That had obviously all changed for you.
Yeah, again, you're asking great questions, Cornell. And the reason I say that is, I, as soon as I could, and by the way, after all this crashing and accident stuff, I was home 7 weeks later. I still had a wheelchair and crutches and all that, but I as soon as I could drive, I started going out for drives in the morning and in the evening. I mean, it's not like I was being bothered to be at home, but it's like I just needed to get out and really be by myself for a little while. And I realized that this was my form of meditation, is going for a drive. And I might have a cigar while I was out there having a drive too. It was just something that I only do with God. I don't do it socially, don't do it at bars, or in barbecues or anything like that. It was just God and me. And these insights would start to come in. And about a year after my accident, I realized, I'm still sitting here able to stare at a wall for 6 hours, and it's fresh every second. And then my wife came in my office and said, "We're going to marriage counseling." So I said, "Okay." Yeah.
After staring at the wall for 6 hours.
Yeah, right. She's like, realizes something's wrong here. So we went for like 18 months. And during that time, one day she was complaining about something. And, and the therapist literally said, "Listen, nothing you've said should have you coming to my door. this is all totally normal stuff. And then I said, and let me ask a question. Have I done any of these things that, irritate you since my crash? So I had to say my crash because she would never say NDE. She didn't recognize the validity at all. No,
Oh
it was
no.
your plane crash. To her, it was a plane crash. To me, it was a near death experience. And she said, nope, you have not. Because she's a good person and she wasn't lying. She had nothing to gain by that. And I said, it's because that person died in the crash. And like I said before, this is what you have left. And then I sort of felt my near death experience well up inside me. And I said this, I said, and our marriage vows say, till death do us part. And what happens when one of us dies? No matter that we return. I said, to me, our covenant is broken. And the only reason we stay together now is because we choose to. Well, that didn't go down real well.
Mm.
A lot of truths don't. But later on, I realized, remember I said she was a widow with 3 babies? I don't know. I just think through that enhanced empathy, I was able to really kind of see this and appreciate it from her perspective. Like literally her husband did die because this guy who looks like her husband and sounds like her husband is not her husband. Different values, different ways of reacting to things. Where is our commonality now? And I started to realize that maybe from the beginning of time, it was never intended I'd be her lifelong husband. Maybe it was intended I'd be her otherwise fatherless children's lifelong father. People do marry for worse reasons, and they certainly divorce for better ones. So there was no, and it's not like, and I really realized, there are no good and bad people here. They're just overwhelmed people doing the best they can to make whatever decisions they can live with. And I would say even now, we're totally amicable. There's no animosity whatsoever.
How are you religiously or spiritually inclined after this? Do you like identify with one religion more than the other? Like Buddhism, for instance, seems to be closer to this kind of philosophy or this kind of thinking.
I would agree with that. Since I'll be honest, to kind of go back to the beginning, my life is one of living childhood dreams. When I was little, I loved wildlife animal shows. Well, like I said, I got to live in Africa, and then one day I got an Emmy for my work with National Geographic. And I was interested in science fiction, and then I got to shrink a TV truck in a backpack and use this cool-looking little satellite dish, out in the middle of nowhere, and that looked kind of sci-fi, and got to do that. And then I loved old airplanes when I was little. Well, when I got big enough, I learned how to fly, and then I built my own airplanes and I flew them.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, thank you. But it's just like a little kid full of curiosity, not taking no for an answer. And but I was also very, very curious about God since I was a child. I would say I was always spiritually inclined. And growing up in the South in the '60s, what were your options, right? Not as many as today. But one day my parents just got tired of hearing all my questions. They said, listen, just put on your suit, walk past the 4 houses down to the church and, ask the preacher all your questions. Well, I did that in June of 1969. And I went down to Highlands Baptist Church in Jacksonville, Florida. And I was going to talk to Reverend Coolidge. Well, he was a really cool looking Cherokee Indian. I mean, he just looked like somebody out of a movie. He was very handsome, big chiseled feature, long black hair, just really cool guy. And he'd been there for years. People loved him. And what's interesting is his daughter was Rita Coolidge, who in the late 60s and throughout the 70s was a very up and coming singer. Waylon Jennings, Kenny Rogers, she was with them all, but she was very much in her own rights a star. Well, her slightly older sister was named Priscilla, and she too was a rising star. So here's how that fits into the story. So I go down there to talk to Reverend Coolidge. Well, he's getting ready for the service, so there's no talking to him now. And so I waited through the service, and I thought I'll talk to him afterwards. Well, now there's a line of people out the door, want to shake his hand, invite him to lunch, whatever. I'm like, oh, God, I have to figure this out and come back. So I went home, came back the next Sunday. Now, remember, I said he'd been here for years. But on this Sunday, he wasn't there. And I looked at a lady sitting next to me and I said, where's Reverend Coolidge? Oh, we got rid of him. He did the unthinkable. I said, what? He goes, he married his daughter to a black man. Again, late 60s, Florida. Okay.
Wow.
And I just remember sitting there staring at her thinking, I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like, why is that a big deal? I mean, I'm a kid. I'm not naturally prejudiced. You have to be taught that shit. And so I just sat there and looked at it, and then I just looked straight ahead, kind of like in the Twilight Zone, like I'm the only sane one in the room, and if I open my mouth, they'll kill me.
You were
And
out
she
of
probably
there.
thought I was full of righteous indignation. Anyway, I thought and now I'm stuck in the pew for the whole service of this guy who I didn't have a clue who he was or what he was talking about. So I went home and asked my mom, "Oh yeah, they kicked him out." So you could have told me before I went. Oh, I forgot. Okay, so the thing is, he married Priscilla to Booker T. Jones of Booker T. and the MGs, who was like this incredible musical talent. I believe he opened for the Beatles. He could play anything. And I remember just thinking, well, it's logical. It makes sense to a kid that if two people who are really working on their music careers meet each other, they might fall in love and they might want to get married. The color had, for having been raised obviously in a racially prejudiced environment, I was remarkably untouched by it through that time. I just knew this was bullshit.
Right.
So anyway, I'm just putting it this way. For some reason, that event came back into my mind while I was recuperating in the hospital, like 50 years later. And I realized what I was being taught then that was coming to a focus now. And that was that, and I find it interesting that the two times I went to that church was just before this preacher who'd been there for years got kicked out. And I think the two main things that God was teaching me was that any honor man bestows, man can take away, and that he who does not have a temple in his heart will never find his heart in any temple. So on that day, I chose not to walk the ways of man, religion, but to have a direct personal relationship with God. And he pretty much was saying, listen, we're going to color outside the lines. We are totally going to go where everybody says you should never go to find truth. And you're never going to know what's happening next. The destiny that's written in your palm is now irrelevant. You live by the grace of God. And so he took me all around the world. He's put me in war zones. I've been in definite certain danger many, many, many times. But it wasn't important that I see death. It was important that I see God.
Now, a lot of people have, when they come out of their near-death experiences, they will, if they're Christian or, religiously affiliated, they'll go to their preacher or a priest, and a lot of the times they don't want to hear it.
Well, that's true. But, at some point, you have to let go of your history telling you what it is you know and who it is you are. And you have to start to trust. And I think this is a spiritual transformation. You start trusting in your intuition. Think about it, though. Like in school, we're so domesticated now that, we're pretty much taught to not trust our gut feeling, to rely on science or rely on experts. Like, there'd be these commercials on television, shows kids running and jumping and playing. They're selling kids shoes, but then there's this big disclaimer: make sure your child is consulting with a doctor to make sure they can play. And I'm thinking, what's more important, survival or living? And it's just so crazy. But I think in the end, when I talk about intuition, I think that our ability to intuit is greater than our capacity to know. And that's why I think the intuition of right now, right here, right now, is much more important than, like I said, letting an aging history define us and who we are. And I think that, that just leads to a lot of other ways of looking at ourselves and where we fit in places and in time. And literally, it's a lot about letting go, just letting go.
So what do you think is what is the source? I mean, you use God, but and other people use universal consciousness and stuff. What is it that, it's a hard question to ask. What is there after death? I mean, where do you go? And
I think you pretty much go to where you're already resonating with, Let me give you just a little brief story, like a 3-line story that might point in the direction of the answer. So, like, there used to be this mystic, right? And he could meditate. And when he meditated, he could rise above the body. He could go to these higher planes that we're basically talking about. And one day, he went to this one top of a cliff, and he's looking out upon the valley below. And this whole place was like no vegetation. It was like a rocky canyon, and it was red. It was like sunset. And It was obviously, it was very, as we would call it, very, looked like hell. Okay. And he's standing there and he's looking out below and he sees all these tiny little individual flames. And then he notices standing beside him is, let's just say, the entity whose job it was to run the place. And he said, "What are all the little fires?" And the entity said, "Those are all the individual souls in torment." And the guy looked for a little while and he goes, "I guess you stay pretty busy." And the guy goes, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Keeping those fires burning." And the entity said, "You don't understand. They bring the fires themselves."
Mm-hmm.
And I think that answers your question. We
Yeah.
go where we already are. How many people do you know who aren't happy unless they're miserable about something?
Yeah.
Well, what do you think? Where do you think they're going to go? And I think we really set ourselves up for our afterlife by the types of things we resonate with here, because those become our attachments. Those become the things we define ourselves by. And therefore, I think it's almost like part of being in the afterlife is to like launder yourself of what you are not, to remember who it is you truly are. And I think that's part of it's almost like a healing process. It's almost like living here creates a PTSD.
PTSD.
You got to go
So,
recover from life here in order to move on.
so do you stay there, or are you recycled in a different energy, if you know what I mean?
I believe in reincarnation. Sure.
Right. But as another person or as another energy source, like
Well, that's
a
interesting.
tree or
Oh yeah, you could. I mean, I'm very much of a more Eastern perspective there.
yeah,
I believe everything pretty much has a soul in it, and you can kind of come back as anything again based upon your attachments and where you might say unfinished accounts are. I think. I mean, it's an interesting question. People sometimes really get into the weeds, marrying quantum physics with metaphysics,
right.
and start to consider, well, the nature of time. Is there really any time? Is time an illusion? If time's an illusion, because it's been said that based on quantum physics and entangled particles, where you affect one, you instantly affect the other, that there really could be a particle at the beginning of time and one at the end of time, and they're both quantumly entangled.
At the
And if
same
you
time.
make a change to one and it happens instantly to the other across right now it'd be 14 billion years. Well, then that means that everything between those two endpoints is right now in the present. So that begs the question: are all our other incarnations we're having actually happening right now at the
Still
same
happening.
time? And then
Yeah.
if you think that pretty much everything has a soul, then that begs the question of us actually having lived every possible thing you could live, and we're doing it at the same instant. Now, that only hints at what it means to be a child of God. So, all I can say is I don't have a lot of the answers. I might be able to point in the direction of an answer.
It can only be experienced, right? It can't be
True.
explained really.
Yeah, it's nothing you can get a PhD in. You really have
Yeah.
to live it. And one of the cool things that I'll point out just between religion and spirituality, the Dalai Lama one time said this. He said, "Religion is the tip of the finger, and spirituality is the moon
Yeah.
to which the finger points."
Yeah. I have had through meditation and through psychedelics when I was younger, I have, had profound experiences where I just felt like I was in a expansive field that went on forever and there was nothingness, There was even a color to it. I remember there was a color. It was almost like an amber color, but it was nothing. And I was so peaceful.
That's
And
amazing.
yeah, and it only lasted like 3 minutes. But that, like, knowing that was there got me meditating. And of course, I've fallen off the wagon. I mean, I got to get back onto that, but
Sure.
that's why people do it, because they get that sense of peace and stuff, and they do have a glimpse, I think, at where you went
I
or
think,
what's
and I think it's in all of us to want to have a transcendental experience. For some of us, it might be why we take, one type of drug or another. It might be why some people drink. Who knows why?
yeah,
But we even when we push ourselves, like, I want to take up skydiving, or I want to fly one of those wingsuits, or I want to go scuba diving, or I want to do these things that are really challenging myself. I think it's because it's really a part of us to want to transcend.
I think that's why people want to go back to war zones when they've left them. They want to feel in the moment.
Well, certainly, I think this has been proven in things like studying PTSD, and that's how intensity can really define a sense of self. You know, and
Yeah.
that's why Vietnam vets, if they hear a car backfire, they still jump in the bushes. It might be why people who are in abusive relationships seem to return to those same kind of people, even if they escape the earlier people. Nothing here is saying it's an excuse. It's trying to understand. And I think we can all certainly say that um, there are a lot of people out there who are also, like resting on old laurels. The days gone by. Like the old grandfather who still talks about having done something heroic in Vietnam because that's where he stuck. But again, that intense, and I think part of the art here, of letting go, is just don't let any event define you, even if it was a great moment. You don't become the story. Just say this is what happened at that time, and totally let it go. Just let it pass and become something else.
So you're no longer afraid of death, and you realize that the universe is going to take care of you no matter what.
Yeah, I would say based on my work in war zones beforehand, I'd kind of come to peace with death. But definitely at this point, yeah. I mean, it's obvious now that the way I see it, you're not going to die before you're supposed to, and you're not going to stay here 1 second longer either.
I've heard of some people say they didn't want to go back. But you wanted to go back.
Actually, all I wanted to do was not have to watch those gears spin around again. There was no real sense of where I'd come from or where I'd go to. It's just like, oh, I'm so done with seeing this. And to say I think I can live with this now wasn't to indicate, I want to go back to my airplane building. But yeah, it's a lot of people don't want to have left, and a lot of people do want to go back, and it makes perfect sense because, in this place, and I'll put it this way. Like I said, I didn't see the best version of myself being the guy standing there smoking a Cuban cigar with the Northern Alliance.
Hmm.
I saw the best version of myself having the crap kicked out of me on the other side, being depersonalized down to zero, and literally being humbled. And think about it, Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey. We don't generally go for the heroes who are born with a silver spoon in their mouth and they grow up with mansions. We tend to go for the heroes who are having the shit kicked out of them and they're down in the dust. And the reason they get up is because if they stay there, that's where they're starving to death. And yet they overcome. And I think it's because, most of us have more experiences like that than we do the silver spoon ones.
Wow. Yeah. But you're not looking forward to going back there just yet. You're not ready. You're fine here for the minute.
For the moment, yeah. But I would definitely say that if God were to say, as uncomfortable as it was, I need you to go back to return to the path of man making, what it is to be a man. Because, somewhere in here I heard it's easy to find God, it's hard to become a man. And I would go. I would definitely go. But, excuse me. But for now, I'm okay here.
Okay, I want to bring up your books. And I know Cassie, thank you very much for... Cassie is our moderator here, and she's been linking all of your material here. But I want to bring up your books just to show the covers. You have written 2 books, one about your experience and one about the aftermath, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And just correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm going to show your first book.
Sure.
Your first book is this one, right?
Yes. That picture is of me in Africa. I'm about 300 miles from anyone walking due north. And that's a little tiny meerkat, like a mongoose, walking next to me.
Oh, yeah.
And I just thought it was a great picture for the book. And
That is a good one.
Like I said, I was told I was in the in-between, so I call it the in-between, a trip of a lifetime. I guess I could call it Back by Popular Demand or Catch and Release or something like that, but that seemed to work as a title.
Okay, and you guys can find it on Amazon. I'm going to show his second book. Now, this is just about your experience. What's the difference with the second book?
Well, with the first book, there were a lot of different podcasts and people were interacting and they seemed to find the experience interesting because the first book, again, was a lot of detail about my life all over the world, life and adventures of Jim, and then the near-death experience. And then like I said, starting to look at different parts of life from a very different perspective. And then people said, well, how do we put this into practice for ourselves? And so I thought about that. So almost a year to the day later, it came out with this other book called The Practice in Between, The Art of Letting Go. And the reason I chose that title is I believe it's pretty central to whatever you could say it was that I got out of this experience. When I was in there in the hospital, like I didn't start drinking till I was 42, and I'd have a stressful job in IT, and I'd come home, and if I might have a rum and coke, and if it felt good, I might have two more. I wouldn't say I was an alcoholic, but it really doesn't matter. I'm just saying that I probably enjoyed it a little more than I should. And while I'm laying there in the hospital, it's like God removed from me the representation of alcohol. He said, well, what do you want to do with this? Do you want to take it with you, meaning take it with you into your, continue through your life and into the future, or do you want to leave it behind? If you want to take it with you, I will carry it for you. If you want to leave it behind, I will remove all your attachment to it. It'll be as if you never had it. It'll have no pull on you. And I said, leave it behind.
That's a good deal.
So it just disappeared. I haven't had a drink since, and that was 6 years ago. I don't even think about it. It's not even a struggle. It doesn't occur to me. And at that point, he said, all the force of will you will ever need is found in the art of letting go. Always celebrate life of the individual spirit.
Could you repeat that again? It sounded very profound, and I
sure. He said, all the force of will you will ever need is found in the art of letting go. Always live life in celebration of the individual spirit. For no one and no thing can stand before the brilliance of a truly naked soul. And I think I was mentioning before we had our show that, I used to practice martial arts, and there's this cool statement out of that has to do with Japanese swordsmanship, kendo. And it says that on the field of battle, when a samurai draws his sword and throws away his scabbard, it's because he'll never need it again. On this day, he's free. That is how we're supposed to live our lives, every single moment, with that much abandon, that much letting go, that much just let's go for it and see what happens.
I'm going to leave it there because that is an amazing quote to end the stream at. Just stick around, Jim. I want to talk to you after the broadcast. But thanks for stopping by, everybody, and thank you to Cashew, our intrepid moderator, for helping out with all those links and stuff. And thanks, guys, for stopping by, and I'll talk to you all later.